Your father is gone, and so is your place in this family.
She was declared homeless at her father's grave. The rain hadn't stopped when the final soil was thrown onto Stephen Rotich's coffin. Flowers lay crushed. Mourners were already walking away. And right there between the fresh grave and the fading crowd, Brenda Rotich was told her life no longer mattered. "Your father is gone," a cold female voice said behind her, "and so is your place in this family." Brenda turned her knees still in the mud just in time to see security step forward. Her small bag was ripped from her hands. The world spun. Her fingers clutched the only thing she had left, a thin necklace her father once told her never to lose. Thunder cracked, the gates closed, and Brenda was dragged away before she ever knew what her father had truly left her. Before the story begins, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you believe powerful stories deserve to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. Stephen Rotich had been a man the city of Nairobi whispered about long before his name ever appeared on glass towers or shipping terminals. People knew him as a visionary, a self-made billionaire who built his logistics empire from a single trucking route across East Africa. To the world, he was disciplined, strategic, almost untouchable. But inside his own home, Stephen Rotich was quieter, softer, and deeply tired. Brenda had always known that side of her father. She remembered how he used to sit alone on the veranda in the evenings, staring into the distance as the sun dipped behind the hills of Karen Estate. Sometimes he would call her to sit beside him, saying little, just placing his large hand over hers as if grounding himself in her presence. "You're stronger than you think, Brenda," he once told her, his voice low and thoughtful. "Life won't be kind. But you must stay kind anyway." Back then, she didn't understand why he sounded like a man already saying goodbye. Brenda was 10 when her mother died. The house had gone silent overnight. The warmth vanished. Her laughter echoed too loudly in hallways that suddenly felt too big for just 2 people. Stephen tried to be both parents at once, but grief had hollowed him out. Business trips became longer, conversations shorter, and slowly the distance between father and daughter grew not from lack of love, but from exhaustion. That was when Namsa entered their lives. She arrived like a solution. Elegant, composed, always perfectly dressed with a smile that impressed board members and church elders alike. She spoke softly, laughed politely, and seemed to understand Stephen in ways others didn't. To the public, Namsa was a blessing. To Brenda, she was an unanswered question. At first, Namsa tried, or at least she pretended to. She praised Brenda's manners in front of guests. She bought her dresses that fit well enough. She asked about school, never too deeply, never enough to invite real closeness. There was always a polite distance carefully maintained. Then came Kelvin. Kelvin Dubé was Namsa's son from a previous relationship, already in his late teens when he moved into the Rotich household. He brought noise entitlement and a sharp tongue that cut without warning. "This place is wasted on kids," he once muttered, looking around the mansion like it bored him. "It should belong to people who know how to enjoy it." Brenda had been sitting quietly with a book. She didn't respond. From that moment on, something shifted. Namsa stopped correcting Kelvin when he mocked Brenda. Meals became colder. Invitations disappeared. Family photos never included her unless Stephen insisted. And Stephen noticed, but he was fighting his own battles. The pressure on his empire had intensified. Expansion into new ports meant negotiations, threats, betrayals. At night, Stephen coughed more often. He held his chest when he thought no one was watching. Only Brenda saw it. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked once, helping him up the stairs. "I'm fine," he said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But tired didn't explain the locked study, or the late-night calls to his lawyer, Elias Mwangi, or the way Stephen began giving Brenda long, searching looks as if memorizing her face. One evening, just weeks before his death, Stephen called Brenda into his study. The room smelled of old paper and leather. Files were stacked neatly, but his desk was bare. He closed the door himself. "Promise me something," he said. Brenda swallowed. "Anything. No matter what happens. Don't lose yourself. And don't lose this." He placed a thin necklace in her palm. Simple, almost unimpressive. A small metallic pendant hung from it, warm from his skin. "It's just jewelry," Brenda said, confused. Stephen smiled faintly. "No, it's protection." She wanted to ask more. But he stood up, signaling the conversation was over. That was the last private moment they ever shared. Stephen Rotich died suddenly. The official statement said cardiac arrest. The doctors said it was fast, painless. But Brenda would always remember the way he looked that morning, paler than usual, distracted as if weighed down by something invisible. The funeral was massive. Business leaders arrived in black convoys. Politicians gave speeches filled with words like legacy and impact. The press stood behind barriers documenting every tear and handshake. Brenda stood beside Namsa, dressed in black, hands clasped, feeling like a guest at her own father's goodbye. Namsa cried in public, loudly, perfectly. Kelvin wore dark sunglasses and whispered jokes to a cousin during prayers. No one noticed Brenda shaking. After the burial, everything changed with terrifying speed. The house that once felt distant became hostile. Locks were changed. Staff were reassigned. Conversations stopped when Brenda entered rooms. At breakfast one morning, she found her seat gone. "Sit somewhere else," Kelvin said casually. "That chair's taken. Taken by who?" There were empty chairs everywhere. Namsa said nothing. Later that day, Brenda overheard a conversation that made her chest tighten. "She doesn't need access to the West Wing anymore," Namsa told a house manager. "Remove her things." But Madam the man hesitated. "Sir Stephen." "Sir Stephen is dead," Namsa snapped, "and I make the decisions now." That was when Brenda understood. Her father's death wasn't just a loss, it was a removal of protection. That evening, she knocked on Namsa's door. "I want to know where I stand." Brenda said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. Namsa looked at her slowly like she was assessing an object. "You stand where I allow you to stand," she replied. "This family is moving forward. Don't become a problem." Brenda nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She returned to her room, half empty now, and sat on the bed, clutching the necklace under her dress. For the first time in her life, Brenda Rotich felt like she was standing on the edge of something dark, and she had no idea how far she was about to fall. Stephen Rotich had been buried, but his shadow still lingered over the Rotich estate like a presence that refused to leave. For Brenda, every corner of the house carried a memory: his footsteps in the hallway, the faint smell of his cologne in the study, the low hum of his voice when he spoke on late-night calls. For Namsa, those same memories were obstacles. 3 days after the funeral, Namsa summoned everyone to the main living room. Brenda arrived quietly, standing near the edge of the room. Kelvin lounged on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, legs stretched out like he already owned the place. Several senior staff members stood stiffly nearby, unsure where loyalty now lay. Namsa stood at the center, impeccably dressed in black silk, her posture firm and commanding. "We need clarity." She began, her voice smooth but firm. "Stephen is gone. This family must move forward with order." She turned to a man in a gray suit, Elias Mwangi, Stephen's longtime lawyer. "Please explain the situation," Namsa said. Elias cleared his throat. "There is a will," Mr. Rotich made provisions. Namsa raised a hand, cutting him off. "There is one will," she said sharply, "and it has already been reviewed." Brenda's heart jumped. Elias hesitated. His eyes flickered briefly toward Brenda, then back to Namsa. "Yes," he said carefully. "The document submitted names you as the primary executor of the estate." Kelvin smirked. "And Brenda?" Namsa asked, feigning indifference. Elias paused. "Brenda is not listed as a beneficiary in that document." The room seemed to tilt. Brenda felt the words hit her like a physical blow. "Not listed." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Namsa exhaled slowly, as if burdened by responsibility. "There you have it. Stephen made his choice." "That's not possible," Brenda whispered, finally finding her voice. "I'm his daughter." Kelvin laughed. "Biology doesn't buy companies, sweetheart." Namsa's gaze hardened. "Lower your voice. This is not a discussion." Brenda turned to Elias, desperation burning in her eyes. "You know my father. He wouldn't." Elias looked away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is what the document states." That night, Brenda didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her half-emptied room, replaying every memory she had of her father, every conversation, every look. The necklace rested in her palm, cold and silent. None of it made sense. Stephen Rotich was many things, but careless was not one of them. The next morning, Brenda tried to enter the study. The door was locked. A guard stepped in front of her. Madame Namsa's orders. Something inside Brenda cracked. From that moment on, the hostility was no longer subtle. Her allowance was cut without explanation. Her access to family vehicles was revoked. Staff who once greeted her warmly now avoided eye contact. Even meals were restricted, her name quietly removed from the dining schedule. "You eat when I say you eat," Namsa told her flatly one evening. "You are not entitled here." Kelvin enjoyed it. He accidentally spilled drinks on Brenda's clothes. He laughed when her laundry went missing. He made jokes in front of guests. Some people forget their place when money is involved, he said once loud enough for her to hear. Brenda endured it all in silence, until the accusation. It happened on a quiet afternoon. Namsa stormed into the living room holding a small velvet box. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. Brenda looked at the box confused. "I've never seen it before." Namsa opened it, revealing an expensive diamond bracelet. "This was in my room," Namsa said coldly. "Now it's gone." Kelvin leaned forward. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Namsa's eyes locked onto Brenda. "Only one person here is desperate enough to steal." Brenda's breath caught. "I didn't take anything. Search her room," Namsa ordered. Brenda stepped back. "You can't!" Two guards were already moving past her. Minutes later, they emerged holding the velvet box. Brenda's knees buckled. "No," she whispered. "You planted that." Namsa slapped her. The sound echoed through the room. "How dare you accuse me," Namsa hissed, "after everything this family has done for you." Kelvin stood up, clapping slowly. "Wow, that's embarrassing." Brenda tasted blood in her mouth but didn't cry. "Not yet. Pack your things," Namsa said. "You leave tonight. This is my home," Brenda said, her voice shaking. Namsa leaned in close. "Your father is dead. You have nothing." The guards didn't wait for Brenda to respond. She was given 20 minutes. 20 minutes to pack a life. She grabbed what little remained: clothes, an old notebook, and the necklace. Mama Ruth appeared silently at the door, eyes filled with tears. "Take this," Mama Ruth whispered, pressing some cash into Brenda's hand. "And don't lose faith." Brenda hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of home. Then she was escorted out. The gates closed behind her with a final metallic clang. That night, Brenda slept on a bench at a bus terminal. The city lights of Nairobi blurred above her as exhaustion took over. Her stomach ached with hunger. Her heart ached with disbelief. By morning, news spread quickly. Stephen Rotich's daughter cast out headlines whispered. Namsa gave interviews, carefully crafted ones. She chose to leave, Namsa said, dabbing her eyes. "We tried to help, but she became difficult." Kelvin posted photos online from the mansion, smiling beside champagne bottles. Brenda watched it all from a cracked phone screen, sitting on a curb with her knees pulled to her chest. The world believed Namsa. No one questioned the story. No one except Brenda herself. She stared at the necklace, tracing the small pendant with trembling fingers. "My father wouldn't abandon me," she whispered. "Not like this." And somewhere deep inside, a quiet certainty began to grow. Stephen Rotich had planned for this. Brenda didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity: this was not the end of her story. Life outside the Rotich gates did not ease Brenda into suffering. It dropped her straight into it. The first week blurred into a haze of hunger, exhaustion, and humiliation. Brenda moved between cheap hostels, overcrowded bus terminals, and the occasional kindness of strangers who offered directions but not shelter. Nairobi was loud, relentless, and indifferent to a young woman whose name once opened doors. Now, her name meant nothing. On the fourth night, she ran out of money. The hostel clerk didn't bother to hide his impatience. "No cash, no bed," he said flatly, already reaching for the next customer's key. Brenda stepped back onto the street, clutching her small bag. The city lights flickered above her like distant stars, beautiful, unreachable. She walked until her feet ached, until the city noise softened into murmurs. Eventually, she found a quiet corner near a closed shop and sat down, pulling her jacket tightly around herself. That was when the reality finally hit her. She was alone, not temporarily, not dramatically, truly alone. Her phone buzzed. For a moment, hope surged through her chest. Then she saw the message. "Unknown number. You should have left quietly. Don't make this harder." Brenda stared at the screen, her hands shaking. She didn't need to ask who sent it. Namsa. The message was followed by another. "If you try anything stupid, remember, you have nothing." Brenda locked the phone and buried her face in her knees. Her body trembled, but she refused to cry. Tears felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The next morning, she went looking for work. She lined up outside restaurants, warehouses, small shops, anywhere with a handwritten sign that read, "Help needed." Most managers barely glanced at her. "You have experience?" one asked. "Yes," Brenda replied. "Administration, inventory, accounts." The man laughed. "I don't need a CEO. I need someone to scrub floors." "I can do that," Brenda said quickly. He shook his head. "Too soft. Next." By midday, the sun burned overhead. Brenda's stomach growled painfully. She sat on a curb watching people rush past with purpose, with destinations. That was when she noticed the elderly woman struggling with a cart full of vegetables. Without thinking, Brenda stood up and helped her lift it over the curb. "Thank you, my child," the woman said, smiling. "What's your name, Brenda?" "Well, Brenda," the woman said warmly. "Kind hands don't stay empty forever." The words stayed with her. That afternoon she found work at a small roadside eatery on the outskirts of the city. The owner, a tired-looking woman with sharp eyes, looked Brenda up and down. "You'll wash dishes," she said. "Pay is daily, no excuses." "Yes, ma'am," Brenda replied. The work was brutal. Grease-stained plates, hot water that scalded her fingers, customers who snapped their fingers instead of speaking. But when she was handed her first few notes at the end of the day, Brenda nearly cried. She bought bread and tea and ate slowly, savoring each bite like a victory. That night she slept behind the eatery, curled up on a flattened cardboard box. It wasn't comfort, but it was survival. Days turned into weeks. Brenda learned which streets to avoid at night, which shop owners were kind, which ones shouted. She learned how to keep her head down, how to disappear. What she didn't know was that back at the Rotich estate, Namsa was growing uneasy. "Have you heard anything?" Namsa asked sharply, pacing the living room. Kelvin shrugged. "She's probably gone, or begging somewhere." Namsa stopped pacing. "Don't be stupid. People like her don't disappear quietly." She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Find her," she said into the receiver. "I want to know where she sleeps." Meanwhile, Elias Mwangi sat alone in his office, staring at a locked drawer he hadn't opened since Stephen's funeral. Inside that drawer was a problem. A problem Stephen had anticipated. Elias remembered the night Stephen had called him in weeks before his death. "I need a contingency," Stephen said, his voice low. "If anything happens to me, and if Brenda is pushed aside." Elias had frowned. "Why would that happen?" Stephen had smiled faintly. "Because greed is predictable." He had handed Elias a sealed envelope. "Do not open this unless Brenda is in danger," Stephen said, "and only if she comes to you willingly." Elias had nodded, uneasy. Now the news headlines played in his mind. Rotich daughter disowned. Something felt wrong, very wrong. At the same time, Mama Ruth had not been idle. The old housekeeper watched Namsa carefully. She listened. She remembered. And one evening as she cleaned the study, a place Namsa rarely entered, Mama Ruth noticed something odd. The floor panel near Stephen's old desk was slightly loose. Her heart raced. She knelt down slowly, lifting the panel just enough to peer inside. There was nothing there now, but the dust told a story. Something had been removed recently. Something important. Mama Ruth's hands trembled. Stephen had always been meticulous. If something was hidden, it was hidden for a reason. That night, Mama Ruth made a decision. She packed a small bag, and before dawn, she left the Rotich estate for the first time in decades. Back at the roadside eatery, Brenda collapsed onto a stool after another exhausting shift. Her arms burned, her back screamed, but her spirit, though bruised, was still intact. She reached under her shirt, touching the necklace. "Dad," she whispered, "if you're still watching, I need you now." Across the city, forces were quietly moving. Truth was shifting beneath the surface, and Brenda, unaware, exhausted, and still homeless, was standing at the center of a storm she could not yet see. The night Brenda was finally forced out of the Rotach estate replayed in her mind like a wound that refused to close. Even weeks later, she still remembered every sound, the echo of her footsteps on marble floors. The cold efficiency of the guards, the way Namsa didn't once look away as Brenda was stripped of the last thing that made her feel human dignity. But what Brenda didn't know was that the expulsion had not been an impulsive act. It had been planned. Earlier that same day, Namsa sat in the master bedroom with Kelvin, a glass of wine in her hand, her expression sharp and restless. "She's still here," Namsa said, "still breathing our air." Kelvin scoffed. "She's harmless. You already cut her off." Namsa turned to him slowly. "No. As long as she sleeps under this roof, she's a risk." Kelvin frowned. "A risk to what?" "To everything," Namsa snapped. "To the story, to the control, to the money." She placed the velvet jewelry box on the table between them. Kelvin's eyes widened slightly. "That bracelet?" "Yes," Namsa said. "And tonight it disappears. Kelvin hesitated. You're framing her. Namsa smiled thinly. I'm removing a problem. Back in her small room at the far end of the house, Brenda had been folding her clothes neatly, unaware of what was unfolding. She still believed naively that reason might save her, that Namsa, despite everything, wouldn't cross certain lines. She was wrong. The accusation came swiftly, too swiftly. When the guards dragged her to the living room, Brenda was still trying to understand why Namsa looked so calm, why Kelvin's eyes avoided hers, why the bracelet felt heavy in Namsa's hand as if it had always belonged there. You stole from me, Namsa said coldly. Brenda's heart pounded. I didn't. The slap came before she could react. The humiliation burned deeper than the pain. Brenda had begged then, not for the house, not for the money, but for truth. Please, she said, her voice breaking. This isn't right. Namsa leaned close, her breath steady. Nothing about you is right anymore. And just like that, Brenda was erased. Now, weeks later, Brenda lived with the consequences of that moment every day. She had moved from sleeping behind the eatery to sharing a small windowless room with 2 other women in a crumbling building on the city's edge. The rent took most of her earnings. The rest barely covered food. But it was a roof. The eatery owner, Mama Joyce, was not kind, but she was fair. You work, you eat, Mama Joyce told her. You complain, you leave. Brenda never complained. She washed dishes until her fingers cracked. She scrubbed floors long after closing. She carried sacks of rice heavier than she was. And still she found the strength to smile at customers. One evening, a drunk man grabbed her wrist. You think you're better than this place? He sneered. Brenda pulled free, her voice steady. Let go. Mama Joyce intervened, shouting until the man stumbled away. Afterward, Mama Joyce studied Brenda carefully. You weren't born for this life, she said. Brenda shrugged. Life doesn't ask what we're born for. Mama Joyce grunted. True. Across town, Namsa's nights were becoming restless. The mansion was quieter now. Too quiet. She found herself staring at the front gate more often than she liked, half expecting Brenda to appear defiant, demanding answers. She hasn't tried to contact anyone, Kelvin reported one evening. That's what worries me, Namsa replied. Kelvin frowned. You're being paranoid. No, Namsa said sharply. I'm being careful. She made another call. I want updates, she told the man on the line. Daily. Meanwhile, Mama Ruth had found Brenda. It took her days of searching, visiting markets, asking vendors, following whispers. When she finally spotted Brenda outside the eatery, bent over a sink full of dishes, Mama Ruth's heart broke. She waited until closing. Child Mama Ruth whispered, touching Brenda's arm. Brenda froze. She turned slowly, disbelief flooding her face. Mama Ruth. They embraced tightly, both shaking. I've been looking for you, Mama Ruth said through tears. I'm so sorry. Brenda pulled back. You shouldn't be here. If Namsa finds out? She already has too much, Mama Ruth said firmly. And she's hiding something. They sat behind the eatery sharing bread. Mama Ruth lowered her voice. Your father didn't leave things the way she says. Brenda's breath caught. What do you mean? There are things in that house that don't add up, Mama Ruth said. And Stephen Rotich was not a careless man. Brenda looked down at the necklace instinctively. Mama Ruth noticed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That, she said slowly. He gave you that? Yes, Brenda whispered. Before he died. Mama Ruth nodded. Then hold on to it, with your life. Before Brenda could ask more, Mama Ruth stood. I can't stay long, she said. But trust me, this story isn't over. That night, Brenda lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. For the first time since being cast out, something shifted inside her. Not hope, resolve. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she knew this much. Her father had not abandoned her. And whatever Namsa was hiding, it was only a matter of time before the truth demanded air. Brenda's days began before sunrise. The room she shared with the 2 other women was barely large enough to stretch her arms, but she learned to wait quietly, fold her blanket neatly, and slip out before the city stirred. Outside, Nairobi breathed in layers, early morning prayers, drifting from a distant mosque, the rumble of buses warming their engines, vendors arranging produce under flickering bulbs. She walked fast, purposefully, as if speed alone could keep despair from catching her. At the eatery, Mama Joyce handed her an apron without a word. Brenda tied it tight, rolled up her sleeves, and stepped into another long day of heat, grease, and noise. Plates piled high, orders barked, time blurred, yet something had changed. Brenda no longer worked just to survive the day. She worked with intention, saving a little whenever she could, listening more closely, watching patterns. She noticed which delivery drivers came regularly, which suppliers argued over invoices, which numbers didn't quite add up when Mama Joyce complained about missing stock. "You're sharp," Mama Joyce said once, watching Brenda quickly reconcile a delivery note with the day's receipts. "Where did you learn that?" Brenda shrugged. "From my father." It was the first time she'd said the word out loud in weeks. At night she returned to the room with aching legs and a mind that refused to rest. She replayed Mama Ruth's words again and again. "Your father didn't leave things the way she says." Brenda pulled the necklace from beneath her shirt and studied it under the dim light. The pendant wasn't decorative. It was too plain, too deliberate. She tried twisting it. Nothing. She tried pressing the edge. Still nothing. Frustrated, she let it fall back against her chest. Across the city, Namsa sat alone in the master bedroom, staring at the same night sky from the opposite end of the spectrum. The silence pressed in on her, thick and uncomfortable. Stephen's absence had left more than grief. It had left unanswered questions she didn't like to think about. Any word she asked into her phone. "She's working," the voice replied. "Some roadside place. Keeps her head down." Namsa exhaled slowly. "Good. Keep watching." She hung up and poured herself another drink, but it didn't calm her nerves. Kelvin noticed. "You're obsessing," he said, leaning against the doorway. "She's nobody now." Namsa shot him a look. "You underestimate how dangerous nobody can be." Kelvin scoffed. "You're the one with everything." Namsa didn't answer, because deep down she wasn't sure that was true. Meanwhile, Elias Mwangi finally made his move. He stood outside a modest office building, staring at his reflection in the glass. The envelope Stephen had given him weighed heavily in his briefcase. He hadn't opened it. Not yet. But the headlines, the whispers and the silence from Brenda had convinced him of one thing. Stephen's fears were justified. Elias took a breath and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "David," he said when the call connected, "we need to talk. It's about Stephen and his daughter." At the same time, Mama Ruth returned to the Rotich estate under the guise of collecting her remaining belongings. Namsa barely acknowledged her presence. "Take what you need and go," Namsa said curtly. "We're restructuring." Mama Ruth nodded obediently, but her eyes scanned the room carefully. She moved slowly, deliberately, watching which doors were locked, which guards were new. As she passed the study, her heart pounded. She waited until night. When the house finally settled, Mama Ruth slipped back inside. Her hands trembled as she knelt near Stephen's desk. The loose panel was still there, poorly hidden now. She lifted it fully this time. Empty, but the edges were scratched. Something had been removed hastily. Mama Ruth closed her eyes, whispering a prayer. "Stephen, what did you do back in the city?" Brenda experienced her first real test. A supplier arrived late one afternoon shouting accusations about unpaid bills. Mama Joyce shouted back, voices rising, customers staring. Brenda stepped forward. "Let me see the invoices," she said calmly. Mama Joyce hesitated, then handed them over. Brenda scanned the documents quickly. "You're charging twice for the same delivery," she said. "Same date, same quantity." The man froze. Mama Joyce's eyes widened. "Is that true?" The supplier muttered excuses and stormed off. Mama Joyce stared at Brenda in disbelief. "You just saved me a month's earnings." Brenda nodded, suddenly shy. It was obvious. Mama Joyce studied her for a long moment. Then she said, "You'll move to the front. Cash handling. No more dishes." That night, Brenda earned more than she ever had since being cast out. It wasn't much, but it was progress. She used part of the money to buy a small notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Find the truth." Days later, as she counted cash at the eatery, a man stepped inside. Well-dressed, calm, observant. He ordered tea and watched Brenda quietly. When she brought it over, he smiled. "You're efficient." "Thank you," Brenda replied. "My name is David," he said. "I'm looking for someone with integrity." Brenda paused. "You found the wrong place." David chuckled softly. "I don't think so." They spoke briefly. About work, about honesty, about doing the right thing even when no one is watching. As he left, David slipped a card onto the counter. "If you ever want a better opportunity," he said, "call me." Brenda watched him go, her heart racing, not with hope but with caution. Nothing good came easily anymore. That night she tried the necklace again. This time she pressed the pendant firmly while twisting. There was a faint click. Her breath caught. The pendant shifted slightly, revealing a tiny engraved symbol on the inside, an unfamiliar mark, precise and deliberate. Brenda's hands shook. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her father had hidden something in plain sight, and the path to the truth had just opened. Brenda barely slept that night. The tiny click from the necklace replayed in her mind again and again, louder than the traffic outside her window, louder than her own breathing. She lay on her back, staring into the darkness, one hand resting over the pendant beneath her shirt, as if afraid it might disappear if she let go. At dawn, she sat up slowly and examined it again. The symbol etched inside the pendant was small but precise, 3 intersecting lines forming a shape she had never seen before. It didn't look decorative. It looked deliberate, like a mark meant to be recognized. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. It's protection. Brenda swallowed hard. Protection from what? She dressed quickly and left the room before her roommates woke. The air outside was cool, the city still half asleep. She walked without direction at first, letting instinct guide her. By mid-morning, she found herself standing outside a small internet cafe. Inside, she searched for hours. She typed keywords, company logos, old news articles about Stephen Rotich's early business days. She zoomed in on old photographs, scanned documents, anything that might match the symbol. Nothing. Frustration gnawed at her, but Brenda refused to give up. She copied the symbol into her notebook, sketching it carefully. There was only one person left who might know. Mama Ruth. It took Brenda the entire day to track her down. When she finally found the modest house where Mama Ruth was staying, the old woman looked both relieved and afraid to see her. "You shouldn't have come alone," Mama Ruth said, pulling her inside quickly. Brenda showed her the necklace. Mama Ruth's breath caught. "So he gave it to you," she whispered. "You recognize it?" Brenda asked urgently. Mama Ruth nodded slowly. Not the symbol itself, but the way he spoke about it. Stephen trusted very few people. When he planned layers. "What does it open?" Brenda asked. Mama Ruth hesitated. "I don't know. But I know this: your father kept a private safety deposit box, not under his name, under a symbol." Brenda's heart pounded. Where Mama Ruth shook her head. "I never knew." "But Elias Mwangi might." Brenda stiffened. "The lawyer?" "Mama," Ruth said firmly. Stephen trusted him more than anyone outside this house. That night, Brenda made a decision she had been avoiding. She would find Elias Mwangi. Across town, Elias was having a conversation that would change everything. David Ndlovu sat across from him in a quiet restaurant, listening intently as Elias spoke in low, careful tones. "She was erased too quickly," Elias said. Stephen anticipated something like this. David leaned back. "Are you saying the will we saw wasn't the real one?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened his briefcase and placed the sealed envelope on the table between them. "I've had this since before Stephen died," he said. "He told me to open it only if Brenda was in danger." "And she is," David said. Elias nodded. "Then it's time." Before he could open it, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Mwangi," a young woman's voice said softly. "My name is Brenda Rotich." Elias froze. "Where are you?" he asked immediately. They met the next morning in a quiet office away from the city center. Brenda sat stiffly across from him, hands folded tightly in her lap. Elias studied her carefully, the exhaustion in her eyes, the restraint in her posture. "You look like your father," he said quietly. Brenda didn't smile. "I was told my father left me nothing," she said. "I know that's a lie." Elias closed his eyes briefly. "He never intended for you to be unprotected," he said, "but he knew Namsa would try to take everything." He reached into his drawer and pulled out the envelope. "This is the real beginning," he said, sliding it across the table. Stephen wrote this himself. Brenda's hands trembled as Elias opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "If you are reading this," Stephen had written, "then I am gone and Brenda has been pushed aside. This is exactly what I feared." Brenda's breath hitched. The will presented is incomplete. It was designed to draw out greed. "The true distribution of my estate is secured elsewhere, accessible only through the pendant I gave my daughter." Elias looked up. "You have the necklace," Brenda nodded, pulling it out. Elias's eyes widened. "Then you are exactly where Stephen wanted you to be." The letter continued. "Brenda, if you are reading this, I need you to understand something. I did not build my empire for power. I built it so you would never have to beg anyone for dignity. Trust Elias, trust David, and above all, trust yourself." Tears streamed down Brenda's face as she finished reading. "So what happens now?" she asked. Elias took a deep breath. Now we proceed carefully. Namsa cannot know yet. If she does, she'll destroy evidence. As if summoned by fate, Namsa was already growing suspicious. Her source had gone silent. No updates, she snapped into the phone. None, the voice replied nervously. She's moving differently. Namsa's jaw tightened. She's doing something, Namsa muttered. I can feel it. Kelvin rolled his eyes. You're imagining ghosts. Namsa stood up abruptly. I want her watched again. Now. Back at the eatery, Brenda quit her job that evening. Mama Joyce raised an eyebrow. You found something better? Brenda hesitated, then nodded. I found the truth. Mama Joyce snorted. That's rarer than money. Don't lose it. As Brenda stepped back into the night, she felt something unfamiliar stirring inside her. Not fear. Focus. Her father's plan was no longer a mystery. It was a path. And Brenda had just taken her first deliberate step toward reclaiming everything that had been stolen from her. Elias Mwangi did not waste time. Within hours of Brenda leaving his office, he initiated a quiet sequence of moves that had been planned years ago, but never expected to be used so soon. Phones were switched, files were duplicated, old contacts were awakened from long silence. Stephen Rotich's contingency was no longer theoretical, it was active. Brenda sat in a modest guest room Elias had arranged for her, safe, discreet, and far from the places Namsa's eyes usually searched. The walls were bare, the bed narrow, but for the first time in months, she slept without fear of being dragged away in the night. In the early morning, Elias knocked gently on her door. It's time, he said. They drove across the city without speaking much. Nairobi passed by in fragments, glass buildings, informal markets, construction sites humming with labor. Brenda watched it all with new eyes. Once this city had bowed to her last name. Now it barely noticed her. They stopped in front of an old financial building tucked between newer developments. No signs, no obvious security, only a quiet authority that came from age and discretion. This place predates your father's empire, Elias said as they entered, and it operates on trust, not publicity. Inside, a woman with silver hair greeted them politely. Her eyes flicked to Brenda, then to the necklace around her neck. Do you have the key? The woman asked. Brenda nodded and stepped forward. The woman led them to a private room. On the table sat a small steel case. No names, the woman said, only symbols. Brenda's heart pounded as she removed the necklace. Her fingers found the pendant, twisted gently and pressed. The same faint click echoed in the room. The symbol on the pendant aligned perfectly with an indentation on the case. The lock opened. Brenda gasped. Inside were documents, thick, organized, unmistakably official. Elias leaned forward, scanning quickly. His breath caught. Share certificates, he said quietly. Majority holdings. Brenda's legs felt weak. What does that mean? It means, Elias said carefully, that your father structured his empire so the control was never fully visible. These documents represent the real ownership, and it belongs to you. Brenda pressed a hand to her mouth. But the will. The will Namsa presented was designed to distract Elias. Said, Stephen knew greed would rush toward the obvious. He hid the truth where only patience and trust could reach it. There was more. A sealed flash drive lay beneath the papers. Elias inserted it into his laptop. Stephen Rotich's face appeared on the screen. Brenda froze. He looked older than she remembered, tired, but calm. If you're seeing this, Stephen said softly, then my fears were justified. Namsa has shown her hand. And Brenda, you have been tested. Brenda's chest tightened. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you directly. Stephen continued, but I needed to know something. That you would remain who you are even without my name. The video paused briefly, then resumed. Everything I built belongs to you, not because of blood, but because of character. Elias will guide you. David will support you. And when the time comes, you must decide how this story ends. The screen went dark. Brenda didn't realize she was crying until Elias handed her a tissue. Across the city, Namsa was unraveling. She paced the living room, heels clicking sharply against marble floors. Her calls went unanswered. Her informants were suddenly vague. She's gone quiet, Kelvin said from the couch. Maybe she finally gave up. Namsa stopped pacing. No, she said flatly. That girl doesn't disappear without a reason. She walked to the study, opened a drawer she hadn't touched since Stephen's death, and stared at the empty space where something used to be. Her stomach dropped. He moved it, she whispered. Kelvin frowned. Moved what Namsa turned slowly, fear finally surfacing in her eyes. The real plan. Back at Elias's office, the mood was tense but focused. "We can't go to court yet," Elias said. "Not until we secure every piece of evidence. Namsa will destroy what she can." David Ndlovu entered quietly, nodding at Brenda. "You're stronger than Stephen described," he said. Brenda met his gaze. "I don't want revenge." David smiled faintly. "Good. Revenge is noisy. Justice is precise. They spent hours mapping the steps ahead. Financial audits, silent transfers, legal positioning. Brenda listened, absorbing everything. For the first time, she wasn't reacting. She was choosing. That evening, alone again, Brenda held the necklace in her palm. It felt heavier now, not with mystery, but with responsibility. She thought of the eatery, the cramped room, Mama Joyce's rough kindness, the strangers who helped her when they had no reason to. She understood now why her father had waited. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about who deserved power. And Brenda Rodich, once homeless, once erased, was no longer invisible. She was becoming dangerous in the quietest way possible. Namsa did not sleep that night. She lay awake in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Stephen had once chosen himself, listening to the faint hum of the estate's generators. Every shadow felt like an accusation. Every silence felt too loud. By morning, she was certain of one thing. Brenda was no longer lost. "She's being helped," Namsa said sharply at breakfast. Kelvin looked up from his phone. By who? Namsa's fingers tightened around her cup. "That's what I'm going to find out." She began moving pieces the way she always had, quietly, methodically. Old contacts were reactivated. Favors were called in. She ordered background checks on Elias Mwangi, on David Ndlovu, on anyone who had ever stood close to Stephen Rotich. What she found unsettled her. Elias's accounts had activity again. Subtle, legal, purposeful. David Ndlovu had taken an unexpected interest in Rotich subsidiaries, nothing aggressive but enough to raise flags. And Brenda's name had vanished from the streets. "No sightings," the voice on the phone said nervously. "It's like she disappeared." Namsa slammed the phone down. "She didn't disappear." Namsa muttered. "She's preparing." Kelvin watched her carefully. "You're overreacting." Namsa turned on him. "Do you know what happens if Stephen left her anything real?" Kelvin hesitated. "You said he didn't." Namsa's eyes flashed. "I said what needed to be said." For the first time, doubt crept into Kelvin's confidence. Meanwhile, Brenda was being tested in a different way. Elias insisted she attend meetings not as an heir, not as a figurehead, but as an observer. She sat quietly at the edge of rooms where numbers were debated and strategies whispered. She watched how power spoke without raising its voice. "Why am I here?" she asked Elias after one such meeting. "Because inheritance without understanding is a curse," he replied. "Your father knew that." Brenda nodded, taking notes in the same small notebook she had bought with her first honest wages. At night, she struggled with something deeper than fear. Anger. It surfaced unexpectedly when she remembered the slap. The accusation, the way the world believed Namsa's lies without question. Some nights, she imagined confronting Namsa publicly, watching her crumble. Then she remembered her father's words. "Stay kind anyway." Kindness. Brenda realized didn't mean weakness. It meant restraint. Across town, Mama Ruth was questioned. Namsa summoned her back under the pretense of retrieving forgotten documents. "You've been seeing her," Namsa said flatly. Mama Ruth met her gaze without flinching. "I see many things," Namsa smiled coldly. "Be careful, old woman. Loyalty can be expensive." Mama Ruth bowed her head slightly. "So can betrayal." Namsa dismissed her, but unease lingered. Later that afternoon, Kelvin confronted Namsa. "What did you really do to Brenda?" he asked. Namsa looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because things don't add up," Kelvin said. "You said she stole. You said she left, but now you're afraid." Namsa stood slowly. "Fear keeps us alive." Kelvin shook his head. "Or it destroys us." It was the first time he had openly challenged her. At Elias's office, the final piece was coming into place. A forensic audit revealed irregularities, accounts, redirected signatures, forged assets moved hastily after Stephen's death. Nothing that could convict Namsa outright yet, but enough to build pressure. "We're close," David said, "but the moment we act, she'll know." Brenda leaned forward. "Then let her know." The room fell silent. Elias studied her carefully. "You're ready?" Brenda nodded. I won't hide anymore. Not completely. That evening, a carefully worded legal notice was delivered to the Rotich estate. Nothing explosive. Just enough. Namsa read it once. Then again, her hands trembled. They're questioning the will, she whispered. Kelvin felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means, Namsa said slowly, that Stephen anticipated me. She crushed the paper in her fist. Across the city, Brenda stood by a window watching traffic flow beneath the lights. For the first time since her father's burial, she felt something close to balance. The storm was no longer above her. It was approaching everyone else. The legal notice did exactly what Elias had intended. It didn't accuse. It didn't expose. It provoked. Namsa read it again the next morning, slower this time, her lips tightening at every carefully chosen word. A routine review, a request for clarification, a temporary hold on certain transfers. Nothing dramatic, everything dangerous. They're circling, she said to Kelvin, her voice low. Kelvin paced the room. So we fight back. Namsa stopped him with a look. No, we control the narrative. Within hours, calls were placed, interviews scheduled, donations announced. Namsa appeared publicly dressed in white, this time soft and grieving. My late husband's legacy is being protected, she told reporters. There are people who want to exploit his name. She paused, eyes glistening, including those who refused to accept his final wishes. Brenda's name was never mentioned, but everyone knew. Brenda watched the clip from Elias's office, her jaw tightening. She's painting me as greedy, Brenda said quietly. David Ndlovu shook his head. She's painting herself as afraid. Elias leaned forward. This is where patience matters. Let her talk. Brenda nodded, but inside something stirred. She didn't want to be silent anymore. That afternoon, Elias arranged something unexpected. A visit, not to a boardroom, not to a courtroom, to a community center on the edge of Nairobi. This is one of your father's early projects, Elias explained as they walked through the modest building. Before the empire, before the headlines, children ran past them laughing. Women sat in small groups sewing and talking. Brenda stopped, overwhelmed. He never told me about this. He didn't want praise, Elias said. He wanted results. A woman approached them hesitantly. Are you Stephen Rotich's daughter? Brenda swallowed. Yes. The woman's eyes softened. Your father paid for my son's surgery. He never asked for recognition. Brenda felt tears sting her eyes. In that moment, something shifted again. Power wasn't just documents in courtrooms. It was memory. It was truth. It was people. That night, Brenda made a decision. I want to speak, she told Elias. Not to the press, to the people. Elias hesitated. Once you do, there's no going back. Brenda met his gaze. I already went back once when I was homeless. I survived that. I can survive this. Across town, Namsa was preparing her own move. She invited Kelvin to sit. There may be complications, she said carefully, if things turn against us. Kelvin narrowed his eyes. What kind of complications? Namsa exhaled. You may need to distance yourself. Kelvin stared at her. You want me to abandon you? I want you protected, Namsa said. This is my fight. For the first time, Kelvin saw fear without calculation in her eyes. Meanwhile, Elias arranged a quiet gathering. No cameras, no announcements. Just community leaders, former employees, people. Stephen Rotich had helped without ever attaching his name. Brenda stood before them, nervous but steady. I'm not here to accuse anyone, she said. I'm here because my father believed truth survives silence. She spoke simply. About being cast out. About losing everything, about kindness from strangers. She didn't mention Namsa. She didn't need to. When she finished, the room was silent. Then an old man stood. Your father trusted character, he said, and so do we. Word spread not through headlines but through conversations. Namsa felt it. Invitations stopped coming. Calls were returned slower. Faces that once smiled now watched. She's turning them against me, Namsa snapped. No, Kelvin said quietly. She's showing them who she is. That night, Namsa opened a drawer she hadn't touched since Stephen's death. Inside was a folder marked Emergency Measures, her last resort. As Brenda returned to her room exhausted but calm, she held the necklace again. For the first time, it didn't feel like a secret. It felt like a promise being fulfilled. The storm was no longer coming. It had arrived. The folder Namsa opened that night had not been touched in years. Its edges were worn, the label fading, but the contents inside were still sharp contracts drafted in haste, signatures acquired under pressure arrangements, made to disappear problems before they grew teeth. Stephen had known about this folder. He had warned her once calmly that secrets rot faster than bodies. Namsa had laughed then. Now she wasn't laughing. She flipped through the pages with trembling fingers, stopping at a document she had hoped never to need again. A power of attorney clause executed shortly after Stephen's illness, worsened, legal, narrow, dangerous if misused, but effective if activated at the right moment. Kelvin watched from the doorway. "What are you doing?" Namsa didn't look up. "Cleaning." Kelvin stepped closer, reading over her shoulder, his face drained of color. "That's illegal." Namsa closed the folder softly. "So is stealing a life." "But you didn't stop me then." Kelvin recoiled. "I didn't know you planted that bracelet." Silence fell like a blade. Namsa's eyes lifted cold and measuring. "You knew enough." Kelvin swallowed. "I'm not going down for this." Namsa stood. "Then leave." He hesitated, torn between fear and loyalty. Then he turned away without another word. Namsa was alone again. Across the city, Brenda sat with Elias and David, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. The final analysis had arrived clean, undeniable, and devastating. Elias laid the documents out carefully. "The symbol in your necklace corresponds to a private trust structure Stephen created 15 years ago. It holds controlling interest in the group companies. The visible shares were always secondary." Brenda leaned forward. "So everything Namsa's been running was never truly hers." David finished. "She managed operations, but ownership stayed hidden." Elias slid another file toward Brenda. "And this recorded instructions from your father, notarized, dated before his final hospitalization." Brenda's hands shook as she read. Her father's voice seemed to echo between the lines. "If Namsa presents a will excluding Brenda, it is to be considered provisional only. The true beneficiary is my daughter, Brenda Rotich. Any interference constitutes fraud." Brenda closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "This ends it," she said. Elias nodded. "It begins the end." They moved quickly. Court filings were prepared, injunctions requested. A forensic accountant finalized a report tracing asset diversion, small at first, then accelerating after Stephen's death. Patterns emerged. Intent became clear. Namsa received the notice at dawn. She read it once, then again. By the third time, her hands were shaking too badly to hold the paper. "They've frozen the accounts," she whispered. "All of them." Her phone rang board members, bankers, partners. She ignored them all and drove straight to the estate's private office, hoping to salvage something, anything. The access code failed. She tried again. Denied. Panic surged. Meanwhile, Brenda walked into a building she had never been allowed to enter before, the legal wing of her father's empire. No cameras followed her. No applause greeted her. Only quiet respect. She didn't sit at the head of the table. She stood. "I'm not here to punish," Brenda said to the assembled advisors. "I'm here to restore what was broken." They listened, because for the first time, the power in the room wasn't borrowed. It was earned. Namsa arrived at Elias's office unannounced, her composure cracked. "You planned this," she hissed, pointing at Brenda. "You humiliated me." Brenda met her gaze calmly. "You did that yourself." Namsa laughed, a brittle sound. "You think papers make you powerful?" "No," Brenda replied. "Truth does." Namsa leaned closer, voice dropping. "You could have stayed quiet, taken a settlement, lived comfortably." Brenda shook her head. "I lived without comfort. I lived without dignity. I won't trade justice for silence." For a moment, something flickered in Namsa's eyes. Regret, perhaps. Then it hardened. "This isn't over," she said. "It is," Elias replied firmly. "The court has accepted the filings. There will be a hearing." Namsa left without another word. Outside, the city felt different to Brenda, less hostile, more honest. She thought of the nights she'd slept hungry, the strangers who had helped her without knowing her name. She thought of her father's quiet wisdom, "Trust yourself." At home that evening, her temporary home, modest and clean, Brenda sat alone and held the necklace. It no longer felt like a key. It felt like closure. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, but tonight, for the first time since the rain-soaked grave, Brenda slept without fear. The courtroom didn't look the way Brenda had imagined. It wasn't dramatic or grand. No echoing footsteps, no towering symbols of justice carved into stone. It It was clean, functional, almost ordinary, like the kind of place where lives were quietly dismantled and rebuilt without spectacle. Yet the tension inside it was unbearable. Brenda sat between Elias Mwangi and David Ndlovu, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple dark dress, no jewelry except the necklace now resting openly against her collarbone, not as a secret, not as armor, as truth. Across the aisle, Namsa sat rigid, her back straight, her face carefully composed. Kelvin was not beside her. That absence spoke louder than any accusation. The judge entered. The room rose, then settled. And just like that, the fight Namsa had worked so hard to keep hidden was dragged into the light. Elias stood first. "Your Honor," he began, voice steady, "this case is not about inheritance alone. It is about deliberate deception." He laid the foundation calmly, methodically. He presented timelines, documents, inconsistencies, each one small on its own, devastating together. "This," Elias said, holding up a file, "is the will submitted by Mrs. Namsa Rotish." And this, he placed another document beside it, "is the trust agreement created 15 years earlier, notarized and verified." Namsa's lawyer objected. Procedural arguments, technical delays. The judge listened, then overruled. Brenda felt her heart pounding, but she did not flinch. When Elias played the video recording of Stephen Rotich, the room went completely silent. Stephen's voice, calm, deliberate, unmistakably his, filled the space. "If Brenda is excluded," Stephen said in the recording, "then something has gone wrong." Namsa's jaw tightened. The judge leaned forward. "This court will hear all evidence," he said. "Proceed." Namsa's lawyer shifted strategies quickly. They questioned Brenda's character. Her disappearance, her months outside the estate. "Isn't it true," the lawyer asked sharply, "that you left the family home voluntarily?" Brenda stood when instructed. "No," she said clearly. "I was forced out. Any proof?" Brenda looked at the judge, then at Namsa. "I have witnesses," she said, "and I have truth." Mama Ruth was called next. The old woman walked slowly to the stand, her posture bent but her eyes steady. She spoke of the planted bracelet, the changed locks, the orders to remove Brenda's belongings. She did not exaggerate. She didn't need to. Namsa stared straight ahead, expression unreadable. Then came the financial audit, charts, transfers, signatures. Elias pointed to the timeline. Asset redirection began 48 hours after Mr. Rotich's death. Namsa's lawyer tried to interrupt again. The judge raised a hand. "Let him finish." By midday, the room felt heavier. The narrative Namsa had controlled for months was unraveling thread by thread. Finally, the judge turned to Namsa. "Mrs. Rotich," he said, "do you wish to testify?" Namsa stood slowly. She walked to the stand with her head held high. "Yes," she said. Her voice was composed, polished. She spoke of grief, of betrayal, of how difficult it was to manage a grieving household. She implied that Brenda was unstable, ungrateful, manipulated. "I tried to protect my husband's legacy," Namsa said softly. "Some people wanted to exploit it." She glanced briefly at Brenda. Brenda felt the familiar sting, but it didn't break her this time. When Namsa finished, the courtroom waited. Then the judge nodded. "Ms. Rotich," he said, "you may respond." Brenda stood. The room seemed to shrink. "I didn't come here to take revenge," Brenda began. "I came because lies don't disappear if you ignore them." She spoke of sleeping at bus terminals, of being slapped, of losing her name before she lost her home. She spoke without anger. "That necklace," she said, touching it lightly, "was my father's way of telling me not to give up on myself." She looked at Namsa. "You didn't just take money," Brenda said quietly. "You tried to erase me." Namsa's composure cracked. The judge called for a recess. Outside the courtroom, Namsa finally confronted Brenda. "You could have ended this privately," Namsa hissed. "You humiliated me." Brenda met her gaze. "You humiliated yourself when you chose greed over truth." Namsa's eyes burned. "You think this makes you powerful?" Brenda shook her head. "No, it makes me free." When court resumed, the judge's ruling was clear. The will presented by Namsa was deemed incomplete and misleading. The trust structure was validated. Brenda Rotich was recognized as the rightful controlling heir. Namsa's access to the estate was suspended pending further investigation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Namsa sat down slowly. For the first time, she looked small. Brenda didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply closed her eyes and breathed, because the truth had finally spoken for itself. The courtroom emptied slowly, as if even the walls needed time to absorb what had just happened. Brenda remained seated long after most people had left. The ruling echoed in her mind, not as a victory, but as a release. For months, her life had been defined by survival. Now, it was defined by choice. Elias touched her shoulder gently. "It's done," he said. Brenda nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the empty witness stand where Namsa had sat moments earlier. Namsa had left without looking back. Outside, the press waited hungry for reaction. Cameras flashed. Questions collided in the air. "Brenda, how does it feel to win? Will you forgive your stepmother? What's next for the Rotich Empire?" Brenda paused at the building's entrance, the noise pressing in. She raised a hand not to silence them, but to steady herself. "I didn't come here to win," she said calmly. "I came here to tell the truth. That's all I'll say today." Then she walked away. That evening, the Rotich estate felt unfamiliar. Brenda stood at the gate, staring at the same walls that had once expelled her into the rain. The guards shifted uneasily when they saw her, not with hostility but uncertainty. "Welcome home, Ms. Rotich," one finally said, opening the gate. Home. The word felt heavy. Inside the house was exactly as she remembered it, and nothing like it at all. Furniture polished, hallways silent, Stephen's absence pressed in from every corner. Mama Ruth waited near the entrance, tears streaming freely now. "My child," she whispered, pulling Brenda into a tight embrace. "You came back with grace." Brenda held her longer than she meant to. "I didn't come back the same," Brenda replied softly. Namsa's things were already being packed. Boxes lined the hallway leading to the master bedroom. Staff moved carefully, eyes downcast, unsure where loyalties now lay. Brenda walked past without stopping. She went straight to the study. Stephen's study. The door creaked open, releasing the familiar scent of paper and leather. Everything was exactly where he had left it. The chair by the desk. The books marked with handwritten notes. The window he used to stand beside at sunset. Brenda crossed the room slowly and sat in his chair. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. Not for what she had lost, but for what she had nearly lost herself becoming. The next morning, the board convened. Executives who had once dismissed her now stood respectfully. Some looked ashamed, others simply cautious. Brenda listened more than she spoke. When it was her turn, she didn't begin with numbers. "My father believed leadership begins with accountability," she said. "So that's where we'll start." She ordered a full review, not just of finances, but of workplace practices, staff treatment, community impact, silent abuses that money had long disguised. Some faces paled, others nodded. After the meeting, David Ndlovu walked beside her through the corridor. "You're changing things fast," he observed. Brenda smiled faintly. "Slow change feels fast to people who benefit from stagnation." That afternoon, Namsa requested a meeting. Elias advised against it. She may try something, he warned. Brenda shook her head. "If I avoid her, she still has power over me. I won't carry that anymore." They met in a small sitting room. Namsa looked different, less polished, more exposed. Her confidence had been built on control, and now control was gone. "You didn't have to destroy me," Namsa said quietly. Brenda met her gaze. "I didn't destroy you. I stopped lying for you." Namsa laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than me?" "No," Brenda replied. "I think I'm honest." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Namsa spoke again. "What happens to me now?" Brenda considered the question carefully. "That depends on the investigation," she said. "And on whether you choose accountability or denial." Namsa stood abruptly. "You'll regret being merciful." Brenda didn't flinch. "Mercy isn't for you, it's for me." Namsa left without another word. In the days that followed, news spread fast. Rotich heir returns. Daughter reclaims legacy. Empire shifts direction. But the moment that mattered most to Brenda happened quietly. She returned to the community center Elias had shown her, the one her father built without recognition. This time she came openly. She didn't announce herself. She didn't bring cameras. She sat with the women. She listened to their stories. She played with children who didn't know her last name. One woman recognized her and whispered, "You're his daughter." Brenda smiled. "Yes, and I'm here to continue what he started." That evening, alone again, Brenda stood on the balcony of the estate. The city lights glowed below. She touched the necklace once more, not as a key, not as proof, but as a reminder. She had walked through fire and chosen not to burn others with it, and in doing so she had inherited more than wealth. She had inherited purpose. Power did not arrive in Brenda's life with fireworks. It arrived quietly in the weight of decisions no one else wanted to make. In the weeks following the court ruling, the Rotich Group moved through a careful transition. Contracts were reviewed, executives were reassigned, some left on their own. Others were asked to explain choices they had long assumed would never be questioned. Brenda insisted on one rule above all else. Every decision must be traceable, she told the board. No shadows. That single sentence unsettled people more than any threat ever could. At the estate, the atmosphere changed too. Staff who once avoided Brenda now waited anxiously for instructions. Some apologized awkwardly. Others remained silent, unsure whether kindness was now expected or dangerous. Brenda treated them all the same. Fair, calm, observant. One afternoon, Kelvin appeared at the gate. He looked thinner, less confident. "I need to talk to you," he said. Brenda studied him carefully. This was the boy who had laughed while she was dragged out, who had enjoyed her humiliation. "What do you want?" she asked. Kelvin swallowed. "I didn't know how far she'd go." Brenda didn't answer immediately. "You watched," she said finally, "and you stayed quiet." Kelvin nodded. "I was afraid." "So was I," Brenda replied. "The difference is what we do with fear." Kelvin hesitated. "Am I still family?" The question hung between them. "Family is responsibility," Brenda said, "not blood." She didn't forgive him, but she didn't destroy him either. "I won't erase you the way you tried to erase me," she said, "but trust will have to be earned." Kelvin nodded, tears filling his eyes. That evening, Namsa was formally charged. The news broke quietly at first, then louder. Fraud, forgery, abuse of authority. The woman who had once ruled behind polished smiles now sat under scrutiny she couldn't charm her way out of. When asked for comment, Brenda said only this: "I believe in accountability without cruelty." Some criticized her for not celebrating. Others admired her restraint. Brenda didn't care. That night she visited the small room where she had once lived after being cast out. The building was still standing, the walls still cracked. She stood outside, breathing deeply. Mama Joyce spotted her from across the street. "You came back rich," Mama Joyce said bluntly. Brenda smiled. "I came back honest." Mama Joyce studied her, then nodded. "That's rarer." Brenda left an envelope on the counter before she went enough to renovate the eatery to pay wages to ease burdens. No note, no name. Back at the estate, Brenda finally allowed herself to open the last of her father's sealed files. Inside was a simple letter. "If you're reading this, then you've already become stronger than I ever was." Brenda smiled through tears. The letter continued. "I couldn't teach you everything while I was alive. Some lessons only appear when protection is removed. I'm sorry you had to learn them so early." Brenda pressed the letter to her chest. "Do not let power harden you. Let it sharpen you." The investigation into Namsa concluded months later. She lost everything. But she was not destroyed by Brenda's hand. She was undone by her own choices. On the anniversary of Stephen Rotich's death, Brenda returned to the grave. This time the rain did not fall. She knelt quietly, placing fresh flowers. "I found my way," she whispered, "the way you hoped I would." As she stood to leave, her phone buzzed with messages, updates, requests, responsibilities. She turned it off. Some moments deserved silence. Brenda walked away from the grave, not as a victim, not as a conqueror, but as a woman who had survived erasure and chosen meaning. And in that choice, the final balance of the story was set. The first decision Brenda made as the uncontested head of the Rotich Group surprised everyone. She stepped back, not from responsibility but from spectacle. While analysts waited for bold announcements and rivals anticipated aggressive expansion, Brenda did something far quieter. She canceled a planned press conference. She postponed luxury rebranding. She asked for time. "I don't want to lead from noise," she told the board. "I want to lead from clarity." Some executives exchanged uneasy glances. Others nodded, sensing something different about this young woman who had once been thrown out with nothing but a necklace and a small bag. Brenda spent her mornings reviewing reports and her afternoons walking through warehouses, ports, and offices, often unannounced. She spoke to cleaners before managers, drivers before executives. She listened more than she spoke. Patterns emerged quickly. Stephen Rotich had built an empire on discipline and quiet generosity. But after his health declined, small corruptions crept in. Overtime unpaid, safety corners cut, voices ignored. Brenda didn't shout. She corrected, firmly, decisively. One afternoon, she stood in a logistics yard watching containers being loaded under the sun. A young man hesitated when he recognized her. "You don't have to stop working," Brenda said gently. The man swallowed. "My mother used to say your father changed her life." Brenda smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure this place still deserves his name." Word spread not of fear, but of fairness. At the estate, Brenda made another choice. She moved out of the master bedroom. Instead, she restored Stephen's old study and made it her living space. She kept the furniture, the books, the quiet. "This room reminds me why I'm here," she told Mama Ruth. The necklace, once hidden beneath her clothes, now rested in a small wooden box on her desk. It had served its purpose. It no longer needed to protect her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, David Nedlevu visited. "You've changed the atmosphere," he said. "People are watching you." Brenda poured tea. "Let them." David studied her thoughtfully. "You could build something even bigger than your father did." Brenda shook her head. "I want to build something truer." Weeks later, she announced the creation of the Rotich Foundation, not with a gala, not with celebrities, but with a visit to the same community center where she had first spoken publicly. The foundation focused on three things only: education for displaced youth, legal aid for those silenced by power, transitional housing for people cast out with nothing. The irony was not lost on anyone. "This is personal," a reporter remarked quietly. "Yes," Brenda replied, "and that's exactly why it matters." Kelvin kept his distance. He worked quietly in one of the group's regional offices, reporting honestly, keeping his head down. Brenda never interfered. She never punished him. But she never rescued him either. Trust, she believed, had to grow from effort, not guilt. Namsa, meanwhile, faded from public life. No dramatic downfall, no redemption arc, just silence. Brenda heard about it occasionally from lawyers, from whispers, but she never asked. Some endings did not require witnesses. On the one-year anniversary of Stephen Rotich's death, Brenda stood once again at the grave. This time she stood tall. "I was angry for a long time," she said softly. "Not at you. At the world." The wind stirred the grass gently. "But now I understand why you didn't shield me from everything," she continued. "You trusted me to survive. And you were right." She placed her hand over the earth. "I won't waste what you left me," she promised. "Not the money, not the lesson." As she walked back to her car, her phone vibrated with messages, requests for funding, invitations, problems to solve. She smiled faintly. This was her life now. Not perfect, but purposeful. That evening, Brenda returned to the estate and sat alone on the veranda where she and her father once watched the sunset. The city glowed in the distance, alive and restless. She thought of the girl who had been dragged away from a grave in the rain. She thought of the nights spent hungry, unseen, unwanted. And she realized something profound. She would never again fear being erased, because she had learned who she was without a name, without money, without protection. And that knowledge could never be taken from her. Brenda Rotich did not rise because she was a billionaire's daughter. She rose because she endured loss without losing herself. And in a world that often confuses power with cruelty, she chose something rarer. She chose meaning. Sometimes life doesn't break us all at once. Sometimes it erases us slowly, our name, our place, our safety, until we are forced to meet ourselves without protection. Brenda's story reminds us of a painful truth: being born into privilege does not guarantee dignity, and losing everything does not mean losing your worth. When her father died, she didn't just lose wealth, she lost shelter, identity, and the illusion that fairness is automatic. Yet what carried her through hunger, rejection, and humiliation was not money hidden in documents, but character built in silence. This story teaches us that real inheritance is not what is handed to you, but what is revealed when everything is taken away. Kindness shown when no one is watching, integrity chosen when revenge feels easier. Strength found not in power, but in restraint. Namsa lost everything, not because Brenda sought revenge, but because truth has a way of demanding air. And Brenda gained everything, not by fighting loudly, but by refusing to become bitter in a world that tried to harden her. If you've ever felt pushed aside, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from nothing, Remember this, your value does not decrease because someone failed to see it. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Brenda's journey touched you the most? Have you ever experienced a moment where losing everything taught you who you really were? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every one of them. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that remind us of humanity, justice, and hope, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these voices alive.